All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to go over how to use exposure modes. So hopefully you saw something else about the basic exposure modes and what they're good for and things like that. But this one is actually how to actually use them, which might be good to know, right? So I'm going to turn on the camera. That's always a good idea. Turn on the camera first. Things work better that way. So up here in the top, it might be a little hard to see at this angle, but we've got our mode dial, right? So I've got auto here. I've got, here's auto, right? Here's, or they call it Scene Intelligent Auto. This is an EOS R100, by the way, which is a inexpensive, low-end Canon mirrorless camera. But the principles are the same, basically whatever camera you're using pretty much. So we've got auto, which is kind of, they call it Scene Intelligent Auto. That is like point and shoot mode, basically. We've got Program AE, where it's sort of semi-auto, but you can make adjustments and things. And then you've got shutter priority, where you set the shutter and the camera sets the aperture, and you can set other things as well. But you're prioritizing shutter, right? That's the most important thing to me. That's the amount of time that the shutter is open. Then you've got aperture priority, which is you're prioritizing the aperture. How big is the aperture? And you can see the camera gives you a little, and I left this on, a little bit of a clue about why you would use this and what you can control with it. And then you've got manual exposure, where you set everything. And then you've got some other modes too. This is video. These are creative filters, which I think you saw in another video, but I'm not going to go over those. But scenes, like for special types of scenes, like sports and things like that. But we're going to learn how to do, use our basic control, our basic exposure modes to do this kind of stuff. Then we've got hybrid auto, which is a weird movie digest thing, and then we're back to auto. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with auto. So again, this is Scene Intelligent Auto. That's what Canon calls it anyway. This is pretty much full auto. So we're looking at this scene here. Try if I can show it to you here. We're looking at this scene. There's a fan back there that I'll turn on for some of these, but it's not on right this second. So let me see if I get that right back there. So we're at full auto or Scene Intelligent Auto. And you can see as I press halfway, the camera focuses. So that's how you can focus the camera. You can see that it's using autofocus, and it's focusing on that boomerang in the front. I think that's a boomerang, which never work, right? They never actually come back to you. But I'm gonna shoot that, and there we go. So I didn't really make any choices. It is point and shoot mode, kind of like your phone is most of the time. So that is auto. Now I'm gonna go to P. So it's P is for programmed AE, or programmed auto exposure. So you can do some adjustments here, but I'm gonna hit press the shutter halfway again, and it's gonna say, my exposure down here is gonna say 1/80th at 5.6. So I'm going to shoot that shot, and there we go. I got a good exposure. But what's different about program is I can press halfway, and I can roll the control wheel here at the top, and I can go to the left, and it will give me a and you can see the little icon next to the 113, that's for the wheel, right? So it's telling me that I'm adjusting the aperture, and it went away. But now if I roll to the left, I've got a bigger aperture, or a smaller aperture, and a longer shutter speed. And then if I roll, so that's a review image. If I roll to the right, I'm gonna get a faster shutter speed and a bigger aperture. So if I play that back just for a second real quick. So that's at f100 or f5.0 at 100th of a second. That's 1/10 of a second at f16. They're both about the right exposure. Maybe they're slightly different brightnesses wise. But one is going to give me more depth of field. One's going to be less depth of field. One is going to be freezing motion. There's no motion yet in this image, but and then one is going to be blurred motion if there was motion. So that is program. So it's kind of like auto, but you can adjust it. Another thing you can do with this is I can hit this auto exposure. If you can see that, there's a little auto exposure icon. It's a little plus minus. If I hold that down, and you can see now that is illuminating the meter. So that's the light meter. And if I go to the left, I am now underexposing the image. So that's in f-stops or EV, which is this kind of same thing. So now I'm -2. So my image is going to be 2 f-stops darker than what the camera thinks it should be. Interesting, right? And now I'm going to go to the right, and I'm going to go +2. So I roll it until the little tick mark right down there. It might be hard to see, but it's at +2. And I'm going to shoot now, and now it's 2 stops overexposed. That's why it says +2 there. If I play it back, it says +2 there. And now it says -2 right there. My giant finger is giant in that picture. So you can use exposure compensation. So that is exposure compensation. There's a different video for that because it is very useful. I'm going to put it back to 0, and then I'll shoot another one. And now it's you're shooting with what the camera thinks is the correct exposure. But that's exposure compensation, which you can use in all 3 of these modes: program, aperture priority, and shutter priority. Now I'm going to go to shutter priority. So just gonna have to pause just for a second here. All right, I turned on the fan because I'm hot. No, that's not why I turned on the fan. I turned on the fan so that we could have something moving in the shot. So shutter priority is when you want to emphasize either freezing or blurring motion. So you can see now that the icon for the wheel is over by the shutter speed. So right now it's 1/30th. So I'm gonna go down to really slow here. Let's put it at 1/4 of a second. So I might have moved the camera a little bit just by me pressing the button. This is where I would use the timer release or a cable release to be able to do that without touching that, if I really wanted to do good long exposures. Now I'm going to go the other way, and I want to get a really fast exposure. So see how I get to a certain point, like 1/25th, and the image starts to get darker? That's because there's not enough light, right? There's not enough light, and I'm at wide open, I'm at f5, it's blinking. That's telling me that there's not enough light. The aperture is all the way open, but there's not enough light. So that's why this image is getting darker. So what's my option? My only option to make this a correct exposure without being dark is to raise this number, which is the ISO. So I'm going to click on ISO here, and I'm going to raise it to pretty high just for this. This is going to change the ISO from 1600, which is already pretty high, to 6400. So I think we're at 6400. Let me make sure that was at 64. Yeah, okay. So we're at 6400. So now if I press down, it's not blinking anymore. Let's see if I can go any higher. Now I'm at 1/400th of a second, which is not super fast, but it's pretty fast. So now I'm going to shoot that shot, and we'll see what that looks like. Oh, you can see the blades of the fan, right? As opposed to the one where it was a slow exposure, it's just going to be blurred because it's movement. So that's what you can do with shutter priority, is freeze motion or blur motion. Just got to pause one more time here real quick. All right, I turned off the fan because I was freezing to death. There's icicles on my face. I'm not going to show you, it's gross. So so that's shutter priority. I'm going to put this ISO back to a reasonable amount, 1600. It's still pretty high, but yeah. And then I'm going to go to the next exposure mode, which is aperture priority. So aperture priority, you can see, is how you can control, and I hope you saw this in another video, you can control depth of field. It's one of the main ways to control depth of field. So for that reason, this is the mode that a lot of photographers use a lot of the time. All right, through the magic of editing, I charged the batteries. Did you guys see the batteries running out? That's a good lesson. See, even I make that mistake. Make sure your battery is charged. Okay, so we are talking about aperture priority mode, right? AV on a Canon and A on a Nikon camera. So I'm going to roll again to wide open here at f5. That means that's as big as the aperture gets. And now I'm going to shoot, and that is at 1/100th of a second. I did have to adjust the ISO because the lighting changed in here a little bit, but shouldn't make a ton of difference. So there is that one. Now I'm going to roll to the right, And I'm gonna go pretty small aperture, like f20. Now I'm gonna try not to move the camera, and I'm gonna let go. And it's a long exposure. That was 1/8 of a second. But much should be, if we review that real quick, I can show you in the video too. Should be a change in depth of field, right? So maybe not a whole lot, but a little bit. Let's try zooming in actually a little bit. And I'm gonna do that again so that we can see if we get a big change in depth of field. So I'm gonna go even higher. Let's do this one again. Let's go f6.3, which is big as, so when I zoom in, the maximum aperture gets a little bit smaller, but okay, so I'm at f6.3. I'm still focused on that boomerang, I think. So I'm gonna click on that. And that's 6.3, and the background will look a certain way, right? That should be a kind of a narrow depth of field. And now I'm gonna go all the way, I'm gonna do even longer, f32, and I'm gonna hit a button and let go. That's a long exposure. And now if we play it back, we can see the change in the background a little bit. I'll show you in the video. You're probably seeing it right now, actually, through the magic of editing. So that is one reason to use, or one of the main reasons that people use aperture priority is to control that depth of field, right? So that is aperture priority. Now let's go to manual, or M. Stands for mark and manual. So for manual, you set the aperture and the shutter. You basically set everything. So now we're on manual exposure. And when I do that, you see that the little control wheel icon is on the shutter speed. If I hit the exposure compensation button right there, the one we used earlier, it switches to the aperture. So if I roll though, watch this. If I roll that way, it is not changing the shutter speed with my aperture. Or let me go back here. Or if I switch to the shutter speed, if I raise the shutter speed, the image gets darker. That's because there's less light coming in, and the aperture is not changing at all. So, and you can see in the meter, this is where, when you're using a manual exposure, you have to use your meter. So you can see the little tick mark there is less than 2. It's over -2 as far as underexposed. So that's underexposed, right? If I go the other way, I'm going to do a longer exposure. Now it's overexposed by 2 f-stops. So when you're in manual, you're adjusting something like the shutter speed or the aperture, but it's not adjusting anything else. So you can have underexposed or overexposed shots. So that's why you have to use that light meter, right? That light meter is going to tell you what the camera thinks is right, which is usually pretty good. So I'm gonna go and put it back in the middle until that tick mark gets to the middle, and that should be a correct exposure. Another thing you can do is I'm gonna hit the info button right there, the info button, and that changes my display. And this would be good for any of your settings, but especially for manual. So what happens when I'm in manual, let me get to that one. So I can see all my settings. I'm at manual, that's the M, at 1/80th of a second, f6.3, auto white balance, and some other things that we could probably talk about later. But this is my histogram. That's what I wanted to show you. So the histogram is a plot of the brightness of the image. So if I do another underexposed image, let's go underexposed. I'm gonna do a really underexposed image. So you see how in the histogram, all the little plot, I gotta play it back here. The plot shows, it's kind of a bar graph of the brightnesses in the image. So everything's down on the left side, which is the shadow side. That's telling me that that's kind of a dark image. Now that might be okay if that's what you want to show. It's you're in charge, right? But it is telling me that that is kind of underexposed. probably. So now I'm going to go the other way, and I'm going to go overexposed, and I'm going to shoot. It says I'm 3 stops over, and you can see how the image is real bright. By the way, that blinking is called clipping. Let me play that back. The blinking is called clipping, and that is where there's no detail. So it's just pure white. Usually you don't want that. So that's a warning, kind of a warning, blinking, a warning, right? And then you can see in the histogram, everything's over on the right, which is the bright side, which is telling you that, yeah, it's a really bright image. So let me do it one more time. I'm going to put it back towards the middle and right there, and I'm going to shoot again. Now the histogram is kind of spread out evenly. You can see there's some lighter areas. There's some lighter areas there, or some darker areas and some lighter areas, but it's kind of spread out, and it's kind of like a little mountain that's centered there. And the image looks like it's pretty well exposed. So that's how you can use your light meter and the histogram in manual mode. You can also use it in the other modes as well. Like if you're doing exposure compensation, you can see if you made the image brighter or darker. One thing that I would warn you against, since we're looking at the display here, is, let me get out of this, there we go, is, oh, I hit too many times. I'm just hitting the info button until it gets back to what I want. So be careful about using this display to see if you got the correct exposure. Your eyes can be fooled, right? So if you're outside, this display is gonna look dark, and you're gonna think like, oh, it's underexposed. Or if you're in a dark room, this display is going to look bright, and you're going to like, oh, it's overexposed. That's not necessarily true. It's just because there's a lot of ambient light and your eye is adjusting, right? So don't rely on this screen for your exposure information as far as does it look bright or does it look dark? Because your eyes can be fooled. I got fooled once in a dark room, and I had everything overexposed because it was, it looked bright to me with my eyes, but it actually wasn't. So that's where the histogram can be really valuable, because the histogram is not, based on the monitor, it's based on the actual image. All right, so those are the main exposure modes, the ones that we want to emphasize anyway, the creative ones on this camera, and they're very similar on all cameras. So I hope that helps a little bit, and I will talk to you again later.